in the deepest corners of forgotten lands, where the fog lingers longer than it should, and the dead are never truly silent, there live stories not written in books, but carved into bone, sewn into bridal shrouds, and whispered from mother to daughter as warnings wrapped in lullabies. This is FolkFear, a channel born from the shadows of bloodline curses, ancestral rituals, and ghost marriages no living soul dares to speak of. Here, every tale is bound by tradition, every scream echoes through generations, and every spirit was once loved, buried, and called back too soon. Tonight, we open the veil between the living and the dead, and behind it waits a wedding that was never meant to happen. Light your incense, seal your windows, and listen well, for the dead remember everything. The mountain village of Geelong was not on any modern map. The bus that dropped Mei-Yun off at the edge of the forest hadn't gone there on purpose. It simply broke down near the old stone path where the moss grew thicker than the road signs. The driver didn't ask where she was headed. He only muttered something about old places best left behind, then handed her a plastic bag of oranges and warned her not to drink the stream water. The sun had long slipped behind the peaks when Mei-Yun began walking. A thin mist hung low, brushing her ankles like cold fingers. The cicadas were quiet. The wind didn't blow. Even the birds seemed to hold their breath. Geelong emerged slowly from the fog like a memory she wasn't sure she had. Wooden homes tilted with age, roofs bowed under years of rain, and red paper talismans peeled from door frames like old scabs. The village hadn't changed. That, somehow, was the strangest part of all. Mei-Yun stood there for a long moment. A city girl now, jacket zipped high, boots speckled with Beijing grime, she looked out of place among the earthen paths and creaking bridges. She had left this village when she was 10 years old, and she hadn't looked back, not until the letter came. Come home. Before your birthday. Your mother is not well. Uncle Hui. No explanation, no phone number, just a date and a name she hadn't spoken in years. A faint flicker of red light caught her eye. One of the homes near the edge of the rice paddies glowed with lantern light. Her old house. She stepped forward. The wooden gate moaned as she pushed it open. The air smelled of wet soil, burnt incense, and something older, something bitter, metallic, blood and ink. Her mother stood in the doorway, framed by lantern light. She looked smaller than Mei-Yun remembered, thinner. Her once dark hair was now streaked with silver and pinned tightly behind her head. Mei-Yun, she cracked, her voice barely louder than the wind. You came. Mei-Yun tried to smile, but her lips felt heavy. Her mother's arms wrapped around her, but the embrace was tight, not warm, like someone trying to hold on to something slipping away. Inside, the house was dim. Candles lit the hallway, casting long shadows that danced like figures bowing in silent procession. The ancestral altar was still there, larger than she remembered. New scrolls had been added, names she didn't recognize. Offerings of rice, wine, and folded paper money crowded the lacquered surface. Her mother caught her looking. We've had losses, she said, and then fell silent. Later, after rice porridge and tea, her mother led her to her old room. Everything was untouched, her childhood desk, her calligraphy brushes, even the red envelope she had taped to the wall the day she left. But the window was nailed shut. She stared at it. Why is this "Wind," her mother cut in quickly. "It howls too loud at night. You'll sleep better this way." That night, Mei-Yun couldn't sleep. The mattress was too stiff, the silence too deep. In the city, even at midnight, there was always noise, horns, voices, flickering neon. But here, even the wind dared not speak. And yet, somewhere in the house, she heard movement. Not footsteps exactly, more like the shifting of cloth. A faint dragging sound, like silk over wood. And beneath it, the faintest murmur, like someone whispering behind the walls. She sat up, heart pounding. The house creaked. The candle at her bedside flickered. The air smelled of camphor and burned sandalwood. A shadow passed outside her door. She waited. Nothing. No one. Only the sound of the ancestral bell, ting, 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 swaying on its own in the prayer room. The next morning, she asked about it. Her mother was pouring tea. Her hand shook slightly. "It was just the wind," she said. "But the windows are nailed shut," Mei-Yun replied softly. Her mother didn't answer. The village welcomed her with silence. No one knocked, no one smiled. Old women watched from behind their doorways. Men dipped their heads but didn't speak. Children ran from alleyways where she passed, like they had been warned not to look her in the eye. Her Uncle Hui found her later that afternoon. He had aged more than she expected. Deep lines carved his face, and he wore a jade talisman around his neck, worn, cracked, and tied with red thread. "You came back," he said simply. "You asked me to." He didn't smile. "I wasn't sure you'd listen." "What's going on here? Why did you say Mother's unwell?" He looked over his shoulder, then motioned her to follow. They walked past the riverbank, through the old bamboo grove, to a part of the village she didn't remember, a place where the ground was dry even in the rain, and the air tasted of ash. There, buried half in earth, was a gravestone with no name. Just a symbol burned into the stone, a circle with 8 lines radiating outward. Uncle Hui pointed at it. "She would have been your aunt, the last 8th daughter." Mei-Yun blinked. "What are you talking about?" He turned to her, eyes suddenly sharp. "In this village," he said, "no 8th daughter lives to marry." She laughed, confused. "That's not even—" But his face didn't change. "It's not a joke," he said. "It's a warning." She swallowed. The air suddenly felt thin. Uncle Hui continued, slower now. "Long ago, an ancestor tried to defy death. He cursed the bloodline. Every 8th daughter is born marked, and when she comes to age, the dead come for her." Mei-Yun stared at him. "This is ridiculous," she said. "I don't believe in—" "But it doesn't matter what you believe," he whispered. "The curse doesn't need your permission." A gust of wind blew through the bamboo. The chimes in the trees didn't move. Only the grave marker seemed to shift just slightly, like something beneath the earth had exhaled. Uncle Hui turned and began walking back. "Your birthday is in 7 days," he said. "We don't have much time." Mei-Yun stood there alone, staring at the nameless grave. She didn't notice the shadow behind her. It watched, and it waited. Mei-Yun awoke to the scent of old wood and ashes. The candle on her nightstand had long since burned down, leaving a puddle of wax like dried tears. The air was still, too still, as if the house were holding its breath. Sunlight tried to peek through the wooden slats nailed across her window, but it only managed to cast thin prison bar shadows on the floor. She sat up slowly. Something about the night before clung to her skin like cobwebs. She hadn't dreamed, but she hadn't rested either. Her body felt sore, like she'd been walking for miles in her sleep. Downstairs, the house creaked softly, timid groans of a place too old to hide its secrets. She found her mother kneeling at the altar, hands clasped, lips moving in a silent chant. A faint curl of incense smoke rose toward the ceiling, writhing like a snake in slow motion. Mei-Yun hesitated. "Mama?" Her mother jumped slightly, then quickly wiped her eyes. "You should be resting. There's no rush to explore." "I want to see the study. I used to love it in there." Her mother's expression faltered. "I've kept it closed. Too much dust." "I don't mind." Without another word, she turned and walked toward the old study, brushing aside cobwebs as she went. The study hadn't changed since she was a girl. The scrolls still lined the walls, names inked in careful calligraphy, dates etched with reverence. Shelves were filled with incense burners, red candles, and bundles of joss paper. A ceremonial drum sat in the corner, skin faded and cracked. The air in the room was heavy, as if time itself hadn't moved since the door was last opened. She began brushing her fingers along the bookshelves, breathing in the scent of ink and paper. A strange comfort bloomed in her chest. Here she had once studied. Here she had once asked her grandfather to tell her the meaning of each ancestral name. But something was wrong. She noticed it when she passed her fingers along the far wall. There was a draft, a cold breath of air escaping from behind the wooden panels. Curious, she began tapping gently. Hollow. She pressed her ear to the wall. Silence. Then a crack, subtle but unmistakable. The panel shifted beneath her palm. With a quiet push, it slid open, revealing a narrow cavity hidden within the wall. Inside were scrolls, old, brittle, and bound in faded red ribbon. Dust coated them thickly, as though someone had deliberately hidden them away from light, time, and memory. She pulled the top one free. The ribbon untied itself far too easily, and the scroll unraveled in her hands. Her breath caught. The ink was black, too black, so black it looked wet. But when she touched it, it smeared like ash. Names were written vertically, all women, all with the family name Chen. Each was marked with a symbol next to her name, an unfamiliar sigil shaped like an eye, or perhaps a mouth sewn shut. And beside that, dates of death. None lived past 18. Her hair on the arms rose. She opened another scroll. More names, more symbols, the same pattern. $8, always the 8th, always dead by their wedding day, or on it. Her hand trembled as she reached for a third scroll. But this one was different. It had no names, just ink, pooled and spreading as if alive. Characters bled into each other, illegible. As she stared, the ink began to drip. A single black bead rolled down the parchment and fell onto her hand. It was warm. She gasped and dropped the scroll. The paper hissed as it touched the floor, curling at the edges as if it had been set aflame from within. She backed away, heart thudding. Her breath came fast now, shallow and sharp. Behind her, the ancestral drum let out a low, trembling thumb, though no hand had touched it. She spun around. No one. But in the corner of the study, the incense burner was lit. She hadn't lit it, and the smoke, it wasn't rising. It was curling down, snaking toward the scrolls on the floor, as if searching for something lost. That night, the dreams returned. Not hers, someone else's. She stood in a dim chamber, wrapped in shadow and silence. A veil hung before her eyes, red and heavy. Her wrists were bound in thread. She could not move. She could not scream. A man knelt before her, but his face was wrapped in cloth, his mouth sewn shut. He reached forward, placing a comb in her hand. The ivory teeth were cracked. Blood oozed from between them. As she tried to drop it, the veil tightened around her throat, pulling, pulling. She woke with a gasp, drenched in sweat, the smell of ashes thick in her nose, and in her lap lay a comb, ivory, cracked, still warm. In the morning, she demanded answers. "You hid them from me, Mama. The scrolls, the names." Her mother's eyes were red-rimmed, sleepless. Her hands trembled as she stirred porridge that neither of them would eat. "We had no choice," she whispered. "There's always a choice." She had not lit it. She shook her head. "You don't understand. This isn't just a story, it's a pact, a binding. Your great-great-grandfather, he made a vow with the underworld. When the war came and the crops failed and the bodies piled too high for the earth to hold, he begged for peace. And peace was given, but at a cost." "The cost was us?" Mei-Yun's voice cracked. Her mother said nothing. Instead, she reached into her sleeve and pulled out something wrapped in red silk. She unwrapped it carefully. A bridal hairpin, gold-plated, shaped like a phoenix, but its wings were blackened as though it had once burned. "This," she said, "was worn by the first bride, the first eighth daughter. She was buried in it, and the grave rejected her. It was found atop the coffin, untouched, clean." "I don't want it," Mei-Yun said, backing away. "You have to," her mother whispered. "It's yours now." She left it on the table and walked away. The hairpin gleamed softly in the candlelight. A drop of ink fell beside it, smearing across the wood. The air smelled of fire again, and behind her, something breathed. The attic had always been locked. As a child, Mei-Yun had tried peeking through the slats in the old ceiling hatch, standing on a stool and reaching as high as she could, but the wood was sealed tight. Her mother once said it was too dangerous, that rats and mold lived up there. Mei-Yun had believed her, but now she didn't believe anything anymore. She found the key wrapped in red string, tucked behind the family altar. She wasn't supposed to touch it, but she had already broken the unspoken rules. The scrolls, the dreams, the comb, the hairpin. They had chosen her long before she arrived. The key turned with a soft click, and the hatch creaked open like a reluctant mouth. A stale wind poured down. She climbed the ladder slowly, one rung at a time. Her flashlight flickered, then steadied. The attic opened up around her, wide and dry and choked with dust. Stacks of boxes lined the wooden beams, bundles of joss paper tied with red twine, broken lanterns, a ceremonial robe torn at the shoulder, an old phonograph missing its horn. Everything smelled of mildew and old incense. Then she saw the chest. It sat alone in the farthest corner, half swallowed by shadow. Black lacquer, its surface cracked with age. Symbols carved into the wood had faded, but a few were still legible. Taoist glyphs for binding, silence, and return. She knelt. The chest wasn't locked, it simply refused to open, until it didn't. When she finally lifted the lid, the air changed. The attic groaned as if shifting under a heavy weight. Cold crept up her arms. Inside, wrapped in yellowing silk, was the bridal shroud. It was not white. It was bone-colored, pale as ash, stained with what looked like tears or ink or something worse. Mei-Yun reached for it. It resisted. But she pulled it free, the silk unraveling slowly, breath by breath, until the full garment lay before her. It shimmered faintly in the dark, and sewn into the seams were strands of hair. Not thread, not string. Hair. Black, gray, silver. She touched it. The moment her fingers grazed the hem, a jolt surged through her, a vision flashing behind her eyes. She saw a girl kneeling before an altar, face blank, hands shaking. Her wrists were bound in red thread. The shroud lay across her shoulders like chains, and behind her, rows of ancestors watched, eyeless and silent. The vision snapped away. She gasped, and suddenly, the attic was no longer empty. There, behind her, stood a figure. A woman, draped in the same shroud, her face hidden behind a red veil. She did not move, she did not breathe, but her presence filled the air like rot fills a grave. Mei-Yun turned to run, but the ladder was gone. She screamed, but the sound never left her throat. The woman lifted her hand, slow and deliberate, and pointed to Mei-Yun's chest. Then she was gone. The attic was empty once more, but the shroud was no longer in the chest. It was in her hands. She descended the ladder like a ghost, the folded shroud clutched to her chest. Her feet touched the floor, and the air warmed again, but the silence remained. Her mother stood at the bottom of the stairs, eyes rimmed with red. "You weren't supposed to find it yet," she whispered. "You were going to bury me in this? Like them?" Her mother nodded slowly. "I didn't want to, but it's the only way." Mei-Yun's hands clenched. "No, it's not. I'm not doing this." Her mother said nothing. Then, as if surrendering, she stepped aside and motioned toward the kitchen. "Come, there's more you need to see." The kitchen table was covered in tools, not for cooking, but for carving. Bone needles, sheets of joss paper, small wooden blocks etched with Taoist runes, a bowl of black ink that shimmered with something unnatural, and in the center, half-finished hell coins carved from pear wood and stained with ashes. Her Uncle Hui sat at the table, hunched over, hands stained. He didn't look up. "You were supposed to be asleep," he muttered. "What is this?" "Preparations," he said, "for the wedding." She stared. "This is insane!" "It's tradition. It's murder!" "No," he said softly, "it's a sacrifice." They told her everything that night. How the village once suffered a plague that wiped out half its people. How an ancestor, a Taoist sorcerer known only as Master Chen, prayed to the underworld for mercy. How he offered his daughter, the 8th born of his line, to be wed to a spirit groom in exchange for peace. And how the spirits accepted. A pact was formed, and it never ended. Every 8th daughter in the bloodline, every generation was promised a silent wedding, a ghost groom, a bridal shroud sewn with the hair of the matriarchs, a procession that no living guest must ever witness. The last time someone refused, her mother whispered, the harvest rotted, the wells bled, and the river carried bones down to the village square. Mei-Yun listened in silence. She thought of the shadow bride, the comb, the dreams, the name carved without sound. "You expect me to go through with this?" Her uncle finally looked up. "We expect you to survive." Later in her room, the shroud lay folded on her bed. It pulsed faintly. She turned her mirror to face the wall. She wrapped the comb in silk and placed it in a drawer she locked. She covered the altar with a cloth, and still she felt watched. The air whispered, not words, but breath. She reached to turn out the candle, and there in the reflection of the window glass stood the shadow bride, closer this time. Her veil had lifted just enough to reveal a mouth sewn shut with red thread. Mei-Yun stared at her own reflection, but it wasn't her face anymore. It was someone else's, wearing the shroud, wearing the smile of the dead. The mask cracked at midnight. It sat quietly on the ancestral wall for years, perhaps decades, gathering dust beside a row of others. A ceremonial piece, carved from sandalwood and lacquered in crimson, its expression frozen in a smile that never reached the eyes. Mei-Yun remembered it from childhood, but only vaguely. Back then, it had seemed curious. Now, it felt alive. She heard it first. A sharp, dry sound, like bones splitting under weight. She had been lying in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling when it came. Crack! Not thunder, not wood settling, no storm outside. Just that sound, brittle and wrong, followed by a faint creak, as if something heavy had turned its head on a wooden nail. She rose slowly. The candlelight in the hallway flickered against the old portraits. Her footsteps barely made a sound on the wooden floor, but as she approached the ancestral wall, she felt a pressure in her chest, like something didn't want her there. The mask had split. A thin, jagged crack now ran from the left eye down to the chin, like a scar that had waited too long to bleed. Its smile seemed wider now, its gaze hollow. Behind her, something shuffled. She turned quickly. Nothing. Just the altar and the masks, all 6 of them. Except she could have sworn there were only 5 yesterday. "Why are there so many masks?" Mei-Yun asked at breakfast the next morning, pretending not to tremble. Her mother stirred porridge she didn't touch. "She's offerings." "To whom?" Her eyes lifted. "To the brides." "Brides?" Her uncle spoke quietly. "Each 8th daughter gets a mask, carved on the eve of her ritual, painted in silence, hung on the wall after the procession. It honors the passage from one world to the next." "I thought no one was allowed to witness the ceremony." "They're not. That's why the mask is made first." She pushed her bowl away. "One of them cracked last night." Her uncle's spoon stopped. "That means she's restless," he said. "One of the past brides." "Restless?" "They want your place." Later that day, Mei-Yun wandered into the prayer room. The masks loomed above her, each with subtle differences. Lips too thin, eyes too wide, noses carved off-center. They had no names, but she felt their identities anyway. Not objects, women, watching her. She noticed something strange. The 6th mask, the new one, was different. It hadn't gathered dust. The lacquer was still fresh, the red paint still sharp, and in the right corner of her forehead, someone had carved her name, Chen Mei-Yun. She stumbled backward. They had already made her mask. That night, the dreams returned. Only this time, she was not the bride. She was standing in a crowd of women, all wearing veils, all barefoot, all silent. Their faces blurred, their hands folded, their eyes leaking black ink. Each held a mask to her chest, smiling, bleeding, cracked. One of them stepped forward. She didn't speak, but Mei-Yun understood her anyway. "You were supposed to stay away." The bride lifted her mask and pressed it over Mei-Yun's face. It was warm, wet. Then Mei-Yun woke. Sweat soaked through her sheets. Her mouth was filled with the taste of burnt wood, and on her pillow sat the cracked mask. Not a dream, not a vision. Real. She screamed. Her mother came running, saw the mask, and froze. "It started," she whispered. "What has?" "The calling." They tried to hide the mask, locked it in a drawer, wrapped it in salt, drew protection sigils around it. But by morning, it was back on the wall. Now, 7, and the crack had deepened. Mei-Yun refused to sleep. She spent the night in the courtyard, back pressed to the cold stone well, a burning joss stick clenched in her hand like a weapon. Her mind raced. This was no longer superstition. This was not metaphor. It was real, and it wanted her. In the quiet before dawn, she heard a whisper. Not from the house, but from beneath it. "The veil, wear the veil." She turned toward the altar room. All 7 masks now faced away from the wall, looking at her. By the 4th day, Mei-Yun felt herself slipping. She stopped eating. She spoke less. The reflection in her mirror began to lag, blink too long, and her face didn't match her thoughts. Sometimes her eyes weren't her own. Her mother tried to console her. "You only need to last 3 more days. Then it will be over." "You mean then I'll be dead?" "No," she said gently. "You'll be joined. I didn't agree to this." "Neither did I," she whispered. That's when Mei-Yun realized her mother had once been the 7th daughter. That night, Mei-Yun returned to the ancestral room with a blade. She stood before the masks, heart pounding, and pointed the tip toward her own. But the wood bled. She hadn't touched it, hadn't even moved, yet red liquid trickled down from the mask's painted mouth, dark and thick, and landing with a soft drip on the floor below. She backed away. Drip, drip, drip. From behind her, the hallway lanterns extinguished one by one. The altar bell rang, and then laughter. Soft, childlike, feminine. It echoed from the walls, but no mouth spoke it. She turned. No one. Only the shroud, folded neatly in her doorway. And beside it, her mask. New. Whole. Smiling.
There's a story the villagers tell, but never in the open and never above a whisper. They say the mountain once swallowed a girl whole, not through landslide or flood, but ritual. Her name was lost to time, erased from temple records and family scrolls. She was known only as the first, the bride who never left, the one who walked the path between the living and the dead and never returned. And though generations had passed, her shroud still hung in the ancestral chamber of the Chen family, stained with ink, threaded with bone, marked by hands that no longer lived. Mei-Yun first heard the story from Uncle Hugh, Not in the house, not during daylight, but deep in the bamboo grove at dusk, where the trees leaned in close and even the insects seemed to hold their breath. Her name was Chen Lianhua, he said softly, fingers wrapped around a smoking pipe. 8th born, just like you. Mei-Yun sat across from him, her back pressed against a crooked tree, the damp forest floor cool beneath her. He didn't look at her as he spoke. His eyes stayed fixed on the fog curling low through the trees. She was 17 when her father, the Taoist sorcerer, began preparing the rite. It was a time of famine, disease, people dying faster than the dead could be buried. The river was black with ash. The mountains wouldn't grow a single stalk of rice. Mei-Yun swallowed. So he sacrificed her? No, his voice was bitter. He offered her. There's a difference. He paused, then continued. He made a pact with the spirit world, promised that one daughter every few generations would be married to the dead to maintain peace between the worlds. In return, our crops grew, our children lived, the rains returned. But the price? He exhaled smoke, which curled into the shape of a veiled figure before dissolving. The price was Lianhua. Mei-Yun frowned. What happened to her? Uncle Hugh's face darkened. She disappeared on the wedding night. No procession? There was a procession. Red lanterns, gongs muffled by cloth. A shroud dyed in ox blood. But no living guest was allowed to see the groom. No one saw what entered the bridal chamber with her. He leaned closer now, lowering his voice. In the morning, the door was still locked. When they opened it, she was gone. Gone? Vanished. No body, no footprints, just the shroud, folded neatly on the bed. Still warm, still damp. Mei-Yun's skin prickled. They never found her? They never spoke of her again. They walked back in silence. As they neared the house, Uncle Hugh turned to her. The pact wasn't broken. The spirits were pleased. But Lianhua never crossed over. What do you mean? He hesitated. She didn't become spirit. She didn't become dust. She became bound. To what? To us. That night, Mei-Yun found the shroud again. It no longer sat folded in her doorway. Instead, it lay stretched across her bed, carefully arranged, its edges pinned as if awaiting a body. She didn't scream this time. She simply sat in the corner of her room, knees to chest, and stared at it for hours. At some point, the candle went out. She didn't remember falling asleep. She woke in another room, not hers, not now. A red lantern swayed gently above her head. The walls were paper thin. The bed beneath her was carved with phoenixes. She could smell sandalwood, hear distant drums, and feel something cold tied around her wrists. She was in a wedding chamber, and across from her sat a figure, the groom. He wore ceremonial robes, black and red, but his face was obscured, wrapped in silk stained dark at the mouth. His hands rested on his knees, motionless. He did not breathe. And in his lap lay a bridal comb, the same one she had found in her dream before. He lifted it, slowly, reverently, and held it out to her. She wanted to run, but she reached for it. Her fingers closed around it, and the cloth over the groom's face twitched, not from wind, from something underneath. Then she saw the veil beside her, white at first, then red, then black, soaked in something that moved. Mei-Yun woke screaming. Her mother burst into the room holding incense and salt. "The pride's chamber! I saw it! I was her!" Her mother said nothing, just sat on the bed, holding her hand, brushing the sweat from her brow with fingers that trembled. "I don't want to die," she whispered. Her lips quivered. None of them did. Later, Mei-Yun found a small wooden box behind her wardrobe. It once belonged to her grandmother. Inside, a faded photo. A young woman in a red shroud, standing beside a man with no face, his image scratched out. Her expression vacant, her hands folded, her eyes pleading. On the back, in delicate handwriting, Chen Lianhua, 1923, may she never return. In the hallway, the 7th mask cracked, and the 8th began to smile.
The comb was no longer in her drawer. Mei-Yun had locked it away, wrapped in red silk and sealed inside an old jewelry box beneath her clothes. But this morning, it sat on her vanity, resting atop a piece of parchment covered in fresh ink. The ink hadn't dried. The parchment pulsed faintly, and on it, a name, Chun Mei-Yun. Below that, 2 characters, Ming-Huan, ghost marriage. She picked up the comb slowly. Its teeth were warm, humming with something beneath the surface. As she held it, her fingers felt a strange pull, like they no longer belonged to her. She turned to the mirror and paused. Her reflection wasn't mirroring her movements. Not fully. It blinked out of rhythm, tilted its head too slowly, smiled without permission. Then it raised its hand and began combing her hair. Mei-Yun dropped the comb. It clattered against the floor. The reflection froze. The mirror cracked, just slightly, down the center, like a seam opening in fabric. Behind her reflection, a shadow bride stood. No face, no feet, only the shroud and the faint outline of stitched lips beneath a veil. Mei-Yun stumbled backward, and then the reflection returned to normal, blank, passive, innocent. But the mirror still bore the crack. Her hair began falling out that day, not in clumps at first, just strands in the shower drain, on her pillow, caught between the pages of the ancestral scrolls. But as dusk fell, the amount grew. By nightfall, she found a small pile beneath her pillow, black, long, still warm. Her scalp tingled, her skin itched. It was as if something beneath her flesh was loosening her from herself. "I'm unraveling," she whispered. Uncle Hui said nothing. He just set another hell coin on the table, carving a new character into its surface with shaking hands. "It's the veil," he said, finally. "She's trying to pull you through." "Who?" "Your twin." Mei-Yun froze. "I don't have a twin." His eyes rose slowly. "Not in this world." That night, her mother entered her room carrying the bridal veil. It was older than the house, pale red, nearly pink with age, but embroidered with silver threads and crushed flower dye that still smelled faintly of dried jasmine and formaldehyde. Mei-Yun backed away. "No, Her mother's voice broke. "Please, I'm not putting that on. It's the only way she'll recognize you as herself, Mei-Yun. If she thinks you're ready, she may pass quietly. But if she thinks you're resisting, she'll take me." Her mother nodded. "It's about balance," she said. "One enters, one leaves. If the ritual is performed properly, your soul will remain connected. But if you fight it, if you fracture it, she'll take more than your place." "What does that mean?" "She'll take your name, your face, your future, and the world will forget you ever existed." Mei-Yun sat in silence long after her mother left. The veil lay motionless now, but it pulsed in her vision like something breathing. She stared at it for a long time, and then she reached out. Her fingers touched the edge, silk and age and dust, cold at first, but quickly warming, like skin. She lifted it, just an inch, just enough to see what lay beneath. But the veil did not behave like fabric. It clung to her face, to her thoughts. Suddenly, she couldn't see her room anymore, only darkness and breath, not hers. Then she heard the voice. "You are me. You were always me." She ripped the veil off, but the voice lingered, and now the mirror in her room was gone. Not broken, not cracked, just missing. Its frame remained, but the glass was black, like a pool of ink, smooth and reflective only when it wanted to be. And in that ink, the bride watched, waiting. The village grew colder. Fog rolled in earlier each day, curling into their wooden homes through cracks in the walls and beneath the doors. Dogs refused to howl, birds had fled. The air smelled of sandalwood and something foul beneath it, old paper and slow decay. Villagers began leaving offerings outside Mei-Yun's home. Folded joss money, candied lotus, burned feathers, nails wrapped in silk, as if apologizing in advance. She was no longer one of them. She was becoming something else. On the sixth night, she stood outside alone. The moon was low, the air sharp. She walked barefoot to the edge of the river, where the old stone bridge arched like a spine over the water. Her breath came out in mist. Her reflection stared back at her, eyes hollow, hair thin, mouth trembling. But then a second reflection appeared, standing beside her, wearing the veil, smiling beneath stitched lips. Mei-Yun didn't scream. She only whispered, "Why me?" The shadow bride turned its head and whispered back, "Because I was never meant to leave."
The first sign was the comb. It had moved again, now resting at the foot of her bed, teeth down in a shallow bowl of rice, as if someone had planted it there like a grave marker. The second sign came with the wind, or rather, the lack of it. That morning, the air inside the house was still, so still that even incense smoke rose without a tremble. But the door to her room swung open on its own, not wide, just enough for her to hear it. Footsteps, soft, heavy, wrong, like someone walking barefoot through water that wasn't there. She ran to the hallway. No one. But the trail remained. Blackened rice grains, burnt joss paper, threads of red silk, leading to the ancestral altar. And resting on it, a folded robe, a groom's robe, deep red, embroidered with phoenix feathers, stitched in bone-colored thread. It smelled of wax and centuries, and next to it, a pair of shoes, perfectly polished, yet clearly never worn by the living. Her name was pinned to the collar, for Mei-Yun, from the house beyond the gate. She didn't eat that day. She didn't speak. Her reflection had stopped following her again. Instead, it stood a moment too long, turned when she didn't, blurred its edges when she blinked. It began watching. That night, the ink returned, seeping from the corners of her room like veins through the wood. It spread beneath the floorboards, climbed the legs of the furniture, pooled around the base of her bed. She stood in the doorway, frozen. And then he appeared. The groom. A shadow first, then a shape. Not quite a man, not quite a ghost, something in between. He was tall, robed, his face obscured by a long pale veil hanging from a wedding crown of hollow gold and dried chrysanthemum. His hands were gloved, not for warmth, but to hide. He stood there in silence just beyond the altar, head bowed. Then he lifted his arm, and in his palm, the comb. She stepped back, shaking. "No, this isn't real." He didn't speak, didn't move, didn't breathe. But the air thinned, pulled from her lungs like something hungry had entered the room. The candles dimmed. The ink on the scrolls behind the altar began to run, weeping down the parchment like blood from an old wound. She blinked. He was gone. But the comb lay on her pillow. "Who is he?" she asked her Uncle Hui the next morning. Uncle Hui didn't answer immediately. He sat in the kitchen, carving talismans into bamboo slats, salt scattered across the floor in a crude protective ring. "His name isn't written," he said. "Not anymore. But he's real." "Yes, and he's waiting." The spirit groom was not a single soul. That's what she learned next. He was many, a host, a vessel created from centuries of dead husbands, boys who had died before marriage, men whose spirits were never honored, soldiers left unburied, lovers buried with no name, bound together by ritual, by grief, by promise. He wasn't a person, he was a role, a weight, a crown worn by whatever spirit could bear it long enough to complete the rite. The groom was a mask, and someone, something, had just put it back on. That night, the door to the ancestral prayer room was open. She knew it hadn't been before. Inside, dozens of small offerings had been placed in a circle: rice, wine, strands of hair, broken mirrors, shriveled lotus seeds. The old wedding altar had been reassembled in the center, draped in red cloth and flanked by unlit lanterns. And above it, scrawled on the wooden beam in thick, runny ink, "The ceremony must not be seen by the living." She backed away slowly, and then she saw the mask, the groom's mask. Plain wood, no eyes, just a slit for the mouth. But sewn across it, 6 strands of black hair, her own. The next morning, the villagers stopped speaking to her entirely. Even the children who once stared now turned away, their mothers pulling them by the arm, muttering prayers under their breath. A pile of folded robes was left on the doorstep. Red, bridal, her size. That evening, her mother found her staring at the sky. No stars, no moon, just clouds swirling in strange, unnatural shapes, like a veil being lowered over the heavens. Her mother knelt beside her. "You have 3 nights left. I don't want him." "You don't have to want him," she said, placing her hand over Mei-Yun's heart. "You just have to endure him. I'm not a candle to be burned for light." Her mother didn't speak, only wept. At midnight, the silence broke. A knock on her window. 3 times. Slow, deliberate, soft. She turned, heart stilled. The window was still boarded from the outside, the glass frosted with years of dust. But in the frost, a fingerprint. Then another. Then 5. And outside, just beyond the thin wood, a shape, broad-shouldered, still, listening. Knock, knock, knock. Her name was whispered, not by a voice, but by the walls themselves. She didn't sleep. She sat on the floor, wrapped in salt, with 7 hell coins pressed to her palms. At 3:33 a.m., she heard breathing, not hers. And when she finally dared to raise her eyes, the groom stood behind her in the mirror, wearing her father's face. By the 7th night, the house no longer slept. It pulsed. Every wall, every beam, every locked drawer and sealed window, it all seemed to breathe, as though the ancestral home had become something alive, or worse, something undead. The offerings began before dawn. Red threads tied to doorknobs, bowls of uncooked rice placed at every threshold, salt lines redrawn every hour. The family altar was no longer just a shrine, it had become a staging ground for a wedding or a binding. The Taoist priest arrived before sunrise. No one saw him enter. He simply appeared, seated cross-legged on the kitchen floor, surrounded by crushed herbs, copper bells, and old talismans etched into parchment so thin it wept when touched. His robes were black, his face gaunt. A long braid hung over his shoulder like a serpent asleep. He opened his eyes only when Mei-Yun entered. "You are not ready," he said. "I'm not going through with it," she whispered. He tilted his head, examining her as one might examine an offering before discarding it. "You will," he said, "because the hollow has already opened." The hollow was not a place, it was a state, a crack between realms, opened only through blood, ritual, and betrayal, a path walked not by the feet, but by the soul. It led nowhere, but something always came through it, sometimes a whisper, sometimes a shadow, sometimes a groom. And now it was open, because Mei-Yun had returned, because she had bled, because she had refused. The priest began drawing a circle in the courtyard. Not chalk, not paint, ink mixed with ashes from the family tomb. He chanted beneath his breath, his voice never rising above the sound of the wind, which had begun to swirl in tight, unnatural spirals. Her mother stood nearby, clutching a folded bundle wrapped in black cloth. Inside was the forbidden offering: a lock of Mei-Yun's hair, a sliver of her fingernail, a scrap of her blood-stained bedsheet, and, folded beneath it all, a letter she had written when she was 13, addressed to no one, in which she had unknowingly signed her true name, a name the spirits now recognized. The priest knelt and pressed the bundle into a clay jar. He poured oil over it, sealed it with wax, bound it in red twine. Then he whispered a prayer, not for protection, but for permission. The jar hissed. Smoke leaked from the seam. The offering had been accepted. "You must not look at the groom," he told her. "I've already have." He paused, then sighed. "Then it will be harder to sever him." That night Mei-Yun found her aunt's diary, the one who vanished years ago, the last 8th daughter before her. It was hidden beneath the floorboards in the prayer room, beneath a loose plank, beside 3 rusted coins and a withered chrysanthemum. The first page was blank. The second read, "The veil is not worn to hide the face. It is worn to hide the fear." Page after page described the signs. The ink bleeding from scrolls, the mirrors going black, the footsteps without sound, the dreams that whispered names not yet spoken. And then one sentence written again and again. "He has no face. He has no face. He has no face." The final entry chilled her more than any spirit could. "If you speak during the ritual, he will know your voice. And once he knows your voice, he will find your name. And once he finds your name, you will be part of him forever." The ceremony was to begin in 2 nights. The Taoist priest laid out the items in the center of the courtyard. A hollow coffin carved from pear wood, a wedding shroud soaked in wine and salt, a thread of red silk long enough to bind 2 wrists, a candle made from funeral wax and a strand of Mei-Yun's hair, a mirror, cracked but not broken, and finally, a mask, plain, pale, empty, to be worn by the bride, so she would not see, so she would not remember. That night the dreams were different. She no longer stood alone. She stood beside the groom, and around them a crowd. Not villagers, but other brides, veiled, silent, watching. Each one wore her face, slightly wrong, slightly broken. One of them turned to her, lifted her veil. Beneath it was nothing, no face, just a hollow, deep, black, endless, a space where a soul used to be. Mei-Yun screamed and woke with blood on her hands. Her mother found her trembling. "I won't do it," she said. "You have to. I'll run. There's nowhere he can't follow." Her mother placed something on the table. A blade, small, sharp, ceremonial. "If you truly mean to run, cut your name from your tongue. Cut the sound from your throat." Mei-Yun stared. Her mother wept, then left. In the distance, the altar bell began to ring. Once, twice, 13 times. And in the final echo, a voice. Not loud, not human, but deep, woven from wind and ash and memory. "Bride of the Hollow, your groom has awakened." The shroud had been completed, in silence. Not a single word spoken, not a single needle dropped. It had been stitched in the dark, beneath the flickering shadows of incense smoke and ancestral prayer. 3 women, her mother, her great-aunt, and the Taoist priest's blind wife, had sewn it with fingers calloused from decades of tradition. Threaded into its seams, hair from the dead. Black strands from her grandmother, silver from her great-grandmother, and a lock of red, burnt at the end, from a girl no one remembered by name, only by order. The last 8th daughter, before silence swallowed her. The shroud was laid on Mei-Yun's bed like an open mouth, bone white, heavier than it should have been. When she touched it, it seemed to exhale, not air, but memory, cold and sour and sweet all at once, a scent like wilted chrysanthemums and sealed tombs. It didn't feel like cloth. It felt like skin. Her hands trembled as she lifted it. She hadn't agreed to the fitting, but no one had asked. Her mother waited by the door, holding the red veil. Her eyes were hollow, her voice thin. "We do this so that you may remain." Mei-Yun said nothing. She let the shroud fall over her shoulders. It clung instantly, like it recognized her. The fabric settled onto her body with unnatural grace, tightening at the elbows, wrapping around her ribs, falling just short of her bare feet, like it had been made for her long before she was born. Then came the veil. Her mother approached, tears already sliding down her cheeks. She placed it gently over her daughter's head. The world dimmed. The scent of incense deepened. And for the first time, Mei-Yun could hear them, the other brides, whispering from beneath the floorboards, from behind the ancestral masks, from the walls, from the ink that still bled beneath the altar. Don't run, don't breathe, don't open your eyes. In the mirror, she saw her reflection, but it was not her face beneath the veil. It was the first bride, Chen Lianhua, smiling, and behind her, the groom, barely visible, standing in the far corner of the room, his body cloaked in shadow, his head tilted, watching, always watching. The priest entered at dusk. He held a censer that bled black smoke and carried a bell with no tongue, silent but resonant. He walked in a circle around her, 3 times, each turn slower than the last. Then he whispered, "The hollow sees you." And the red thread was brought out. She was made to hold one end, the other was tied around the comb. The comb was placed in a wooden bowl at her feet, surrounded by ash and peach blossoms. They began chanting, not in Mandarin, not in Hokkien, not in any tongue the living still spoke. It was the language of binding, of names unspoken. Each word thudded against her ribs like a heartbeat that wasn't hers. She felt lightheaded, her ears ringing. The veil dampened the world, but something beneath it grew louder. A voice, not hers, whispering from inside the shroud. "You were born wearing my name." And then came the reflection. The mirror had been placed at the foot of her bed, ceremonial, to bear witness in silence. But now it showed something else. A second version of her, not veiled, not still. This reflection moved, stroking her own hair, tilting her head back, lifting her hand to her mouth and biting the fingertip until it bled. Mei-Yun gasped. her real hand began to sting. When she pulled the veil back slightly, she saw it. Blood. The wound had crossed over. The reflection was becoming her, or replacing her. "I can't do this," she whispered. Her voice broke the air like glass. The priest froze. The veil shuddered. And in that instant, the room darkened. Candles blew out. Ink poured from the cracks in the walls, and from the coffin in the center of the prayer room, meant only for symbolic ritual, a sound. Scratching. Not from the outside, but from within. Her mother grabbed her arm. "You spoke. He heard you." Mei-Yun stumbled back, tearing the veil from her face. "I don't care." The Taoist priest stood solemn. "You broke the silence. You called him to you." Mei-Yun's breath came in short gasps. "Then let him come." "No," her uncle said from the doorway. "Not here, not yet. The procession must continue." "The ritual is broken." Her mother looked at her with grief etched into every line. "No," she said, "now it's begun." That night, she locked herself in her room. The shroud was folded on the floor, unmoving, the mirror covered with cloth. But still, she felt it. The shift. Like something had entered the house and was waiting to be named. At 3:03 a.m., the mirror cloth slipped to the floor. The glass was black again, and her reflection was no longer hers. It wore the shroud, held the comb, and slowly smiled.
The village forgot to breathe that night. Lanterns glowed like dying stars in the mist. No footsteps, no voices, not even the creak of bamboo swaying in the wind. Because there was no wind, just a stillness so thick it swallowed sound, and a fog so dense it blurred the edge between the living and the dead. The hour was near. Mei-Yun stood at the edge of the ancestral home, shroud draped over her body like second skin, veil drawn, hands trembling beneath crimson silk. The comb rested in her pocket. She had braided her own hair. She had not spoken since the mirror smiled. And now she would walk. The Taoist priest raised the bell. It made no sound, but something responded, a low hum beneath the earth, like bones vibrating in forgotten graves. He nodded, and the midnight procession began. No one followed her. No one led her. She walked alone as tradition dictated, guided only by the red thread that stretched from her wrist down the path of flickering lanterns, through the old rice fields and toward the mountain hollow. The red thread pulsed with warmth. It tugged gently, like a heartbeat that was not her own. As she walked, the village watched, not through windows, but from beneath the soil, from behind ancestral altars, from cracks in family shrines, from walls that bled ink when no one was looking. The dead were not guests tonight. They were witnesses, and they lined the path, some visible, most not. Shadowed brides, masked grooms, children with no faces, elders whose feet hovered inches above the ground. They watched her pass. None moved, none blinked. They remembered what the living chose to forget. The altar bell tolled, but not by human hand. It rang from within, a hollow echo, once, twice, 13 times. With each toll, the fog thickened, and the red thread pulled harder. She reached the forest gate just after midnight. The trees bent inwards, forming an arch of branches scorched black. Symbols carved into the bark glowed faintly, Taoist seals of warding, long since cracked by time. The priest had warned her, "Pass through the forest gate, and you are no longer of this world." And yet she stepped forward, not because she believed, but because something else inside her did. The forest beyond was not dead, but it was no longer alive. Leaves didn't rustle, soil didn't crunch, the air had no scent, no temperature, no weight, only that thread remained, guiding her deeper, deeper toward the altar of joining. She began to hear drums, muffled, distant, as if this, and then voices, low, drawn out, chanting a name, not hers. Lian Hua, Lian Hua, the first bride, calling from within the veil. At last she reached the altar chamber, a stone platform hidden deep in the heart of the hollow, surrounded by rootless trees and pools of still water that reflected nothing at all. There was no groom waiting, only a coffin, open, empty, but the air around it twisted, as though something invisible stood just beside it, waiting patiently. The comb in her hand pulsed, the veil tightened across her eyes, and the red thread pulled one last time, straight into the coffin. She stepped forward. Inside the coffin was not wood, it was mirror, polished black stone that showed her reflection in full, but wrong. Her face aged, her hair white, her mouth sewn shut, her eyes hollowed and stitched with thread. This was not her. This was her end. The priest's voice echoed faintly behind her, though he was not there. Do not speak, do not see, do not choose. But it was too late. She had already spoken. She had already seen. And now the choice had been made for her. The red thread snapped, but no sound came, only a gasp from the coffin. And then he appeared. The spirit groom, clothed in crimson robes that flowed like mist, his face obscured by a translucent veil. Behind it, movement, shifting features, not one man, but many, mouths whispering behind mouths, eyes blinking behind eyes, a collage of the dead. He reached toward her, palm up, waiting as the ritual demanded. Her knees buckled, but she didn't fall. Something held her up, something inside the shroud. The brides were near now. They circled the altar in complete silence, their feet hovering, their eyes hidden. Some held shrouds, others held masks. A few held nothing at all, only emptiness, gaping and ancient. The first bride stepped forward. Her veil lifted slightly, revealing not a face, but a void, a blackness so deep Mei-Yun felt herself pulled toward it. The groom turned, and for the first time he spoke, not aloud, but through her bones. "Take your place, and you may remain. Refuse, and we will replace you." She reached for the comb. Her fingers trembled. The brides leaned in. The groom waited. The coffin pulsed. And in that moment, she made a choice.
The comb slipped from her fingers. It struck the altar stone with a soft clink, too quiet for what it meant. The sound echoed through the hollow chamber like a bell tolling backwards, a defiance so small, yet so final. Mei-Yun did not bow. She did not kneel. She did not speak the words etched into the scroll hidden beneath her shroud. Instead, she pulled back her veil and looked the groom in the face. It was not one face. It was many. Layered like old wallpaper peeling back across time, faces of drowned boys, of sickened soldiers, of grooms buried without brides, of sons never named, stitched together by threads spun from grief and rot. Some of the mouths smiled, others screamed, most wept, and all of them stared at her with the same thought: you were supposed to surrender. The priest had warned her, do not look at him, do not give him your eyes. But now, it was too late. He saw her, and worse, he recognized her. "You are the end of the promise," he said. His voice was not singular. It came from beneath her skin, from the walls of the hollow, from behind her own teeth. "You are the end of the promise, and the end must be punished." The altar split down the center. The black stone coffin began to close without her inside it, and that was the violation. The ritual was broken, and the hollow awakened. The fog surged inward like a living thing, wrapping around the trees and swallowing the ground. The brides screamed without sound, their mouths wide behind their veils as they dissolved into streaks of ink. The groom's veil caught fire. No flame, just burning, white-hot, colorless, silent. He reached forward, but not to hold her, to take her name. Mei-Yun turned and ran. The red thread was gone. The path behind her had vanished. Only the forest remained, alive and wrong, shifting, breathing, closing in around her. Every tree bore a mask now. Every branch whispered. Every root reached. The dead did not need legs to follow. They moved through memory, through blood, and she had already bled. At the village edge, the bell tolled, but not the ancestral one, the funeral bell, the one that was never rung unless a body had been lost without burial. Her mother stood at the gate, eyes blank, mouth moving in prayer. Salt lines had been drawn in a full circle around the house. Candles flickered, joss paper flew through the windless air like moths without wings. Then she saw her daughter, emerging from the trees, shroud in tatters, veil trailing behind her like torn silk. But something had followed. The groom stepped from the forest, his face now blank. No mouths, no features, just a smooth mask of flesh. A canvas waiting to be painted with the next bride's face. The altar behind him bled black water. The brides no longer whispered. They wept. Mei-Yun crossed the salt line and collapsed. Her body convulsed once, then went still. The priest arrived seconds later, chanting. The circle held, for now, but the groom stood just beyond it, watching, waiting, not for her body, but for her soul. Her mother fell to her knees. "I told you not to speak," she sobbed. Mei-Yun opened her eyes, but they were not hers. They were gray, veiled, empty. Uncle Hugh emerged from the shadows with the ancestral scrolls. He opened one, searched for her name, and found nothing. She had been erased. Not dead, not alive, not remembered. The priest placed a drop of her blood on a talisman. It evaporated. He looked up at the sky. No stars, no wind, no moon. The night had swallowed her fate. The ritual was broken, and now, so was the balance. The ground split behind the shrine. The ink from the altar scrolls ignited, and in the distance, the wail of the groom. Long, hollow, ancient, a sound no ears were meant to survive. It cracked the stone steps. It shattered the mirror in the prayer room. It killed the river. They buried the comb that night, wrapped in salt, sealed in stone, carried far into the hills. But the next morning, it sat on Mei-Yun's pillow again, whole, clean, as if waiting for her hand. And in every mirror in the house, her reflection smiled, but her mouth never moved. It began with the walls. At first, they wept in silence. Tiny trails of black ink trickled down the plaster near the altar. Slow, steady, unbothered by gravity. The scrolls had already burned the night before, their ashes sealed in ceramic urns. But now, the house seemed to write its own scripture. New characters appeared each morning, strange symbols not seen in any known dialect, circular, fractured, thorned. Some looked like names, others looked like warnings. One bled through the bedroom ceiling above Mei-Yun's bed. Return. Another carved itself into the bathroom mirror. Replace. The Chen family home was no longer a sanctuary. It was a vessel, an altar of wood and grief and dust, groaning under the weight of an inheritance no one dared speak aloud. The salt lines had failed 3 times. The candles blew out regardless of wind. The joss paper reappeared unburned each morning. The offerings rotted too fast, flies gathering before the incense ever reached smoke. Even time seemed uncertain now. Clocks stopped ticking. Water refused to boil. Shadows flickered in rooms with no light, and sometimes the house breathed. Mei-Yun no longer slept. Not truly. She closed her eyes, but she always awoke in another place, a mirror version of her home, flooded in red, floors submerged in black water, walls lined with masks weeping dark tears, the air thick with chanting, the same dream every time, and always, at the end, a voice behind her. "You left, so we stayed." The reflection no longer mimicked her. It watched. It blinked slowly, followed her with its eyes, and sometimes, at dawn, it smiled before she did. One morning she caught it mouthing something. She leaned close to the mirror. Its mouth moved slowly, carefully.
Let me wear you." Her mother stopped speaking entirely. She sat each day at the altar, whispering to ashes, holding the broken prayer beads that once belonged to Mei-Yun's grandmother. Sometimes she wept. Sometimes she bled, her fingers raw from slicing paper effigies long into the night. Uncle Hui sealed every window with wax, then slept outside. He claimed the house was no longer safe for the living. He was right. The ancestral bell rang at random. No wind, no rope, just sound, cold, metallic, distant. The first time, it rang 13 times. The second, 8. Then 3. Then just once. Each chime felt closer. By the 5th night, it rang from inside the walls. That same night, the ancestral altar changed. Mei-Yun entered the prayer room and saw the photos had rearranged themselves. Her grandmother now smiled beside a girl who looked exactly like Mei-Yun but wasn't. A girl wearing the bridal shroud, a girl whose eyes had no whites. A nameplate had been added beneath the image. Chen Mei-Yun. Chen Mei-Yun. It shouldn't have been there. She reached to pull it down, but her hand went through the frame. The photo was not on glass, it was on water. The mirror in her room cracked open like a door, not broken, open. A thin slit across the surface peeled back, revealing darkness beneath, and in it, a bride's hand, slow, pale, reaching. It didn't grab her, it simply waited. Her name was gone from every document: birth certificate, school records, the family registry, all replaced with empty space or ink that had blurred beyond recognition. Uncle Hui tried to rewrite her name on a new scroll. The brush broke in his hand, the ink burned through the paper, and when he tried to speak her name out loud, his mouth filled with salt water. He coughed, choked, and finally whispered, "She's already inside." The house itself began to bleed. Thick black lines streaked the walls, no longer just ink, but something denser, more alive. A red haze hovered in doorways. Footsteps echoed from empty rooms. Laughter, childlike, feminine, sounded from the attic where the shroud had been found. The masks on the ancestral wall turned on their own. No wind, no hands, just the sound of wood scraping wood. And behind every door, a shadow waited. Mei-Yun stood in front of the family mirror one final time. She stared at her reflection, no veil, no shroud, just her. Tired, hollow-eyed, hair falling out in strands, and behind her, a figure, the bride. No longer veiled, no longer smiling, just watching, waiting. The groom no longer came because he didn't have to. He had found a vessel, and the hollow no longer needed to open because it was already here. That night, Mei-Yun burned her childhood journal. Then she opened the attic and climbed inside. No one followed, but from the floorboards below, the house moaned softly, like something had returned to its rightful place. By dawn, the ink on the walls had dried. The bells stopped ringing. The mirror was whole again, and Mei-Yun's bed was empty. Only the comb remained, resting neatly on her pillow. The comb was the last thing she owned, not the house,
not the name, not even the body she wore each day, which felt more like borrowed fabric than skin. But the comb, that ancient ivory thing, carved from bone and threaded with memory, remained with her. Always. Even when she tried to bury it, even when she cast it into fire, even when she left it beneath the ancestral tree, wrapped in salt and joss paper and her final breath of prayer, it returned every time, clean, untouched, waiting on her pillow, or in her shoes, or cradled gently in her cold, sleep-stiffened hand, like it knew where she would be before she did. She had come to understand one thing. The curse could not be broken by resistance, only by severance. Not defiance, but destruction. Not of tradition, but of tools. It began with a whisper, her aunt's voice, the one who disappeared before her. The last 8th daughter before the village stopped counting. The voice came from behind the broken altar where the ash had settled thick as snow. She never needed your body, Mei-Yun, only your name. She dug through the old scroll boxes beneath the floorboards where the wood warped from dampness and old ink. There, among forgotten documents and blood-marked contracts, she found a smaller chest, iron-bound, locked with thread. It pulsed when she touched it. Inside, the original wedding comb, the phoenix hairpin, now rusted black, the bridal shroud frayed at the edges, and at the bottom, wrapped in red silk, the blade, short, ornate, cold. The inscription along the handle read, "Cut what cannot be burned." She knew what had to be done. The Taoist priest appeared that evening. He did not knock. He simply stood at the gate, robes billowing though the wind was still. His eyes were dull now, hollowed, like the ritual had drained more than spirit. "I came to bless the final offering," he said. "There won't be one," Mei-Yun replied. He tilted his head, bird-like. "Then you have made your choice." She nodded and held up the comb. The ritual severance would require 3 things: the object of binding, the object of inheritance, and the blood of rejection. If even one was missing, the curse would shift, adapt. It would survive, and it would take another. She placed the comb on the ancestral altar beside a bowl of river water and a dried lotus. The hairpin was thrust through her own braid, tied to generations of women she would never meet again, and the blade rested at her feet, unsheathed, waiting. Midnight came like smoke through broken windows. The mirrors turned black, the candles drowned in wax, the masks on the wall fell one by one. And then silence. Not quiet, silence. The kind that comes before earthquakes, before war, before possession. Mei-Yun took the blade and sliced her palm. The blood fell on the comb. It hissed. It cracked. Not from heat, but from recognition. She lifted the blade again and whispered, "You cannot marry what no longer lives here." Then, with both hands, she snapped the comb in 2. The room screamed, not her, not the priest, the walls. The altar burst into flame, black fire, no smoke. The floor buckled. The scrolls caught light not from candle, but from rage, from the hollow. The bloodline had been severed, and it did not accept. The shroud writhed, the hairpin snapped in her braid, and in every mirror around the house, the same face appeared. The bride, mouth wide, eyes white, hair floating like she was submerged. She let out a single word: thief. The house collapsed inward, not physically, spiritually. The wood split, the shadows peeled. The name Mei-Yun bled from every document and vanished before the ink hit the floor. The reflection in the mirror no longer resembled her, but neither did she. The priest fell to his knees outside the salt circle, chanting until blood poured from his mouth. The mask he carried burned in his hands. The final 8th daughter had severed her tether. The ritual was undone, but not forgotten. The hollow screamed once and was gone. The silence afterwards was heavier than death. It pressed against the air like a storm without wind. Mei-Yun stood in the ashes of the altar, comb broken, blade red, hair falling around her like threads pulled from history. She was not saved. She was not damned. She was unwritten. In the morning, her uncle entered the house. He found no body, no scrolls, no name on the altar, only the cracked comb, and beside it, her shadow, burned into the floor, facing the mirror, smiling.
The village no longer spoke her name. They swept the roads she once walked, closed the windows she once looked through, left offerings not to her memory, but to her absence. And when asked about the Chen family's 8th daughter, the elders only said, "There was no 8th." Even the wind, which had once whispered her name through bamboo and bone, grew quiet. The hollow had been sealed, but the scar remained. The house still stood, but barely. The paint had peeled. The doors no longer shut. The air inside tasted of rust and prayers that had never been answered. Its heart, the altar room, was blackened by fire that had never touched wood, only memory. There was no scroll, no name, no bride. Only a cold spot in the center of the floorboards where shadow would not leave. And in the mirrors, if one dared to look, she could still be seen. A girl in a bridal shroud, face veiled, hands clasped, waiting, not for a groom, but for you to remember her. Uncle Hui tried to leave the village twice. The first time his car broke down before he reached the edge of the forest. The second time he found himself right back at the front gate, unsure how many hours had passed, or why his shirt smelled faintly of lotus and smoke. He stopped trying after that. Instead, he visited the altar every dusk, even though the scrolls were gone. He lit a single candle, burned 3 sticks of incense, and whispered not a name, but a question. Do you still know who you are? The Taoist priest disappeared 3 nights after the severance. No body was found, just his robes folded on the riverbank, and beside them a cracked mirror facing the water. When lifted, it showed no reflection, only smoke. Her mother never spoke again. She continued to sleep in Mei-Yun's room even after the walls began bleeding again. She covered the mirror each morning, washed her daughter's pillow even when it returned dry, and when people asked why she no longer smiled, she simply said, she didn't leave, she was released. But somewhere beyond the veil, Mei-Yun endured, not as a spirit, not as a girl, but as a question left unanswered. The hollow had not claimed her soul because she had severed the red thread. She had refused the comb. She had crushed the inheritance, and in doing so, she had undone the ritual. But rituals do not die easily. They wait. They shift. They watch. There is a shrine now at the edge of the forest, not on any map, hidden beneath weeping trees and stones carved with no names. Locals leave coins there, offerings, hair, folded silk. No one says who it's for. They just know if you see a girl in red walking alone after midnight, do not speak to her. Do not offer her shelter. Do not meet her eyes, because some weddings were never meant to be completed, and the bride who refuses the dead must find her own ending. Inside the attic of the Chen family home, untouched for months, the wind finally blew the dust from an old corner. There, beneath the rafters, rested a box. Inside the box, a broken comb, a burnt bridal veil, and a mirror no larger than a palm. The mirror cracked slowly as dusk approached, not from age, but from recognition. Somewhere in a distant city, a girl wakes screaming. She doesn't know why. She doesn't remember the village, the ceremony, the altar. But she sees ink dripping from her bathroom ceiling, and sometimes her reflection smiles before she does. The curse was never truly lifted, only forgotten, and all things forgotten wait to be remembered.